This is Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr., otherwise known as Sideshow Bob. Bob is a man of refined culture and sophistication. His interests include Shakespeare, fine wine, and light operetta. They also include robbery, election fraud, terrorism, kidnapping, identity theft, jailbreak, genetic larceny, and, let's say a couple diversions into attempted murder. But what is attempted murder, really? Oftentimes, his brother, parents, wife, and son join in these activities. However, none of them have been able to take down even one member of the Simpson family. And for Bob specifically, he can't even defeat a rake. This is the history of Sideshow Bob. Sideshow Bob is one of those characters I always wanted to tackle for this series, but wasn't sure the best way to go about it. The thing about Bob is that his episodes are very specific and very memorable. He's not like Smithers, where there's secret character stuff tucked away between his spotlight episodes. Bob is one spotlight after another. Almost all of his character development falls in these very specific examples. So for this Simpsons Histories, we're going to look at the bigger picture. We're going to look at his individual characteristics and how they eventually spawned new story concepts. Try to figure out, how exactly did the writers try to keep him fresh for over 30 years? Sideshow Bob's first appearance in The Simpsons was in Season 1's The Telltale Head, where his only real job was to stand around and play the slide whistle. As you can see, this is a very different looking Bob here, much more rounded in general. Clearly, Sideshow Bob went through the Sonic the Hedgehog cycle of character design, appearing more sleek and angular in every successive iteration. His big coming out episode, of course, was Krusty Gets Busted, the real building blocks of what this character actually is. This Proto-Bob existed just so he didn't come completely out of nowhere. We see him here, and it's like, it's the slide whistle guy. But after that, it's pretty much the Sideshow Bob we all know and love today. Almost everything is here. Kelsey Grammer, his refined and cultured persona, his penchant for singing, his criminality, his giant feet, his hatred of Krusty, and his rivalry with Bart. These characteristics directly influenced all of his later episodes in one way or another. After Bob goes to prison, he becomes a sort of cultural artifact in Springfield. He'll be in a news article in the background, show up for a sing-along, or be in this Where's Waldo-esque crowd waiting for Michael Jackson. Then we get this version of Sideshow Bob in Bart the Murderer. Oh my. It seems like the writers are keeping this guy in the picture, this little bit of unfinished business that they could use later. Although I think by this point, since it's Season 3, that they already know he's returning. I think Black Widower was an exceptionally smart way to go for his follow-up episode. They could have gone for something like Cape Fear first, where they go straight for the Bart revenge plot. Or they could have done something where he's getting back at Krusty or the town as a whole. But instead, they brought Sideshow Bob to the family. Putting Bob and Selma together converges these two established arcs, and puts him in a situation to have scenes with a lot of important characters. How does Bob interact with Homer and Marge? How does Lisa factor in? Of course, we get another clever mystery to highlight his criminal genius, but most importantly, it brings out the personal angle for the Simpson family. He's not just some random guy that Bart and Lisa once foiled. Seeing him later on actually means something to them. In addition, it introduces politics into the mix, with Bob describing himself as a conservative Republican and taking a jab at the Democrats on the way out. There was a minor Sideshow Bob appearance in a Season 4 flashback, from when he used to dye his hair green, I guess. But other than that, we didn't see him again until his next Spotlight episode. Cape Fear serves as our template for the classic Sideshow Bob revenge plot. After being foiled twice by Bart, here's where they started playing up the rivalry. Somehow, Bob became even more dramatic and grandiose than ever. The show really went out of their way to sell how menacing he is, by giving him a blaring musical theme for all of his later appearances. Furthermore, they made him significantly more cartoony. It establishes the rule that when Sideshow Bob shows up, the reality of the show is going to get looser. Crazier things will happen, and bigger musical numbers will be sung. And of course, they introduced his long-standing problem with rakes. Forget about Bart, this is his real menace in his life. Up next is Sideshow Bob Roberts in Season 6, sidestepping a Bart murder plotline for something the whole town can enjoy. This is easily the most unusual Sideshow Bob episode in terms of its scope. The other ones personally include Krusty or the Simpson family in some way. Here, the writers latched on to conservative politics for a larger satirical point. We still get a mystery and some revenge toward the Simpsons, but by and large, this is about Bob trying to consolidate power. This episode, along with Cape Fear, demonstrates a key weakness of Sideshow Bob, that he is easily bluffed and manipulated by appealing to his sense of vanity. In Season 7, we get Sideshow Bob's Last Gleaming, a sort of hybrid between Bob tackling a larger issue and running it back to Krusty. Hey, I thought you guys reconciled. TV lied to me. Now, Bob's extreme hatred of television seems a little arbitrary, considering he's literally stealing an atomic bomb over it. But to be fair, we have seen this reaction before. Bob is totally like one of those academic types who brags about not owning a TV. What's great about these early episodes is how varied they are. They never leaned on one specific storyline or sequel hook for too long. They instead chose to stagger their topics. Like, they resisted doing 2 Krusty revenge stories in a row. They avoided having him chase Bart over and over and over again. They didn't do Sideshow Bob Roberts after revealing he's a conservative. Every Sideshow Bob episode in these classic years are motivated by something slightly different, kept giving Bart and Lisa a new scheme to investigate. I think that's the key to how they kept things fresh. You could argue that they have similar structure, have reoccurring plot beats, sure, but nothing ever felt like a retread. I think the writers were very conscious of how many different schemes Bob had attempted, because in Season 8, they went for something completely new with Brother from Another series. They introduced Sideshow Cecil, and we learned about the 2 brothers' rivalry and backstory. But most importantly, they allowed Bob to change and grow. It was very much in line with Oakley and Weinstein's more meta and self-conscious approach. We all expect Bob to be the criminal mastermind. Let's instead have him actually reform himself. Let's close the book on the Bart stuff and have them team up to defeat a common foe. Also, Lisa is here. Now, I really liked this episode, and it definitely should have been made, but I think it kind of broke Sideshow Bob as a character. After you have him reform and resolve things with Bart, where can you really go with him? Obviously, the writers didn't expect the series to go on for another 20 years. They probably wouldn't have done this story if they did. They're stuck in this situation where they either have to reboot his character back to villainy, or do something entirely different with him. And if they do reboot him, this episode prevents them from reforming him later in the exact same way. It's a total blocker episode. When Mike Scully took over as showrunner, he basically put Sideshow Bob on a shelf until Season 12. And honestly, I can't blame him. I wouldn't be that eager to follow up that episode. We did get a couple little appearances and jokes about him in the meantime. I always wondered what the story was between him and Comic Book Guy. But anyway, we get his major return to the series with Day of the Jackanapes, in which he does this Manchurian Candidate hypnotism thing in order to get Bart to blow up him and Krusty. This returns to familiar concepts like parole hearings and his hatred of television and Krusty. It's just considerably more self-aware now. Bart clearly takes Bob less seriously as a villain, even bragging about his record against him. It feels kinda weird that this is the direct follow-up to the Sideshow Cecil adventure, that he's right back to wanting Bart dead again. I think it would have worked better if the Great Louse Detective came first. This is another instance of Bob teaming up with the Simpson family, this time with Homer, as they investigate who's trying to murder him. Turns out it's some guy named Frank Grimes Jr. It heavily relies on Homer and Bob as comedic foils, and allows the Simpson family to electrocute Bob the entire time. His hatred of Bart is definitely still present here as a secondary element. Bart is understandably resentful that Homer would even let Bob into the house. And at the very end of the story, Bob attempts to murder Bart, but then can't go through with it because he's grown accustomed to his face. Cue the musical number. This is a pretty important moment characterization-wise, as Bob's inner torment and conflicted feelings toward Bart play a major role going forward. In Season 17, the writers closed out another cycle of Sideshow Bob character development by letting him reform once again. Or at least try to leave the Simpsons stuff behind, run off to Italy to become mayor, and raise a family. We meet his wife Francesca and his son Gino, who have no idea about his criminal past. Bob has to rely on the Simpson family not spilling the beans. This is a pretty smart story concept, in that it makes sense that Bob would want to get away at this point. Putting him in the middle of a travel episode is a nice change of pace for him. I know some people don't like that they gave Bob a family, but I think it's pretty good character development. Unfortunately, Lisa drunkenly reveals his secret, ruining everything. Bob vows revenge once again, and it turns out Francesca and Gino are just as murderous as him. Vendetta! Vendetta! They give Bob his biggest musical moment since Cape Fear, one that even took over the DVD box set theme. But unfortunately, they forgot to write an ending to this story. Dang, they were so close. Season 19 treats us to Funeral for a Fiend, yet another revenge plot against the Simpson family and Bart in particular. Yet another Frasier reunion, as John Mahoney plays Bob's father, while David Hyde Pierce reprises his role as Cecil. Yet another convoluted and improbable scheme. Yet another death trap for the Simpson family to easily overcome. The main gimmick, of course, is that Sideshow Bob is killed off during Act 2. Bart throws away a life-saving medicine, thinking he's foiling his evil plans, while Bob suffers a heart attack and dies. But don't worry, this was actually a scheme executed by the entire family to fake Bob's death so we can switch places with Bart in the coffin. Like I said, it's a convoluted scheme. But at the very least, it closes the book on all this Sideshow Bob family stuff, like one final bash for everyone. Things changed for Bob during the HD era of The Simpsons. He started appearing more frequently in random episodes, mostly as an unvoiced background character. Here he is escaping prison in an establishing shot. He'll be in a dream sequence with his brother. He'll be murdered off screen in a Treehouse of Horror. Or we'll see his chalk outline in a flash forward, sneaking up behind Bart, supposedly playing poker, killing Krusty in a Dr. Seuss parody. Or he'll show up in the opening credits, whether it be during the usual sidewalk scene, the clouds gag, the billboard gag, and even the couch gag. Here's Sideshow Bob as a tambourine in their Musicville short. These later seasons are well known for sneaking references into their background and establishing shots, so it gave him many more opportunities to pop in for a joke. In Season 20's Wedding for Disaster, Sideshow Bob makes a brief appearance as a suspect for Homer's kidnapping. But Bob explains that he's actually making a statue of Krusty, and the two of them spent the day working and watching movies. He then points them in the right direction of the kidnapper. This little cameo is really awesome, in my opinion. We've never gotten Kelsey Grammer where he doesn't take over the episode. It's fun seeing Bob as a random person that they could encounter in Springfield. The only other times this happens is a quick cameo in The Simpsons 500th episode, connecting with one of Bart's former teachers, and giving his condolences at Rabbi Krustovsky's funeral. This is another particularly good one, since it reunites Bob and Krusty. And we get a confrontation with Sideshow Mel as a bonus. I never knew I wanted this feud so badly. Anyway, in Season 21, we get the Bob Next Door, another Bart revenge storyline with a face-off twist. A new neighbor moves in who sounds exactly like Sideshow Bob, which makes Bart suspicious. It turns out, it actually is Sideshow Bob, who studied plastic surgery in prison and swapped his face with his cellmate. This is easily the most complicated of all of Sideshow Bob's plans, which is really saying something. Like, part of it hinges on the cellmate not being able to talk or communicate properly after swapping faces. Even his murder plan is ridiculous, with this pentuple cross-state murder at the 5 corners. In addition, this episode features a lot of body horror. Like, we literally see Bob cut off his own face. Gross. Interestingly enough, this becomes a running gag going forward, which honestly has to be very confusing and horrifying for the people who never saw this episode first. Bob gets out of prison again in Season 25's The Man Who Grew Too Much, this time as part of a prison work program with a company that genetically modifies foods. It pairs Bob with Lisa for this adventure. I guess he's working his way through the whole family at this point. Look forward to the great Sideshow Bob and Marge adventure in Season 33. These two actually bond and find stuff in common, and Bob even saves Lisa's life. But it turns out he was genetically experimenting on himself to make himself stronger and smarter, and planned to steal famous people's DNA to add to the mix. He ends up chasing Bart and Lisa using his new genetic powers and threatens to throw them off Springfield Dam. This scenario seems familiar. Except this time they run into Marge's B-plot, and Bob ends up trying to eat Kearney's face. Yeah, this storyline is weird. Lisa reminds Bob that he's better than this episode, so he commits suicide by throwing himself off the dam. This doesn't work out for a couple of reasons. One, that we've established Bob always survives large falls off Springfield Dam, and two, Bob gave himself gills. Hey, I warned you this episode was weird. Bob gets his own segment in Treehouse of Horror 26, when he finally succeeds in killing Bart. Over and over and over again. You see, Bob is unsatisfied working as a professor and discovered that killing Bart was the only thing that made him happy. These later seasons made this angle a key aspect of his characterization. They were really interested on what truly motivates him. Does he really want to kill Bart, or is it the chase, the sense of vengeance that he needs in his life? In this case, his end goals don't really matter, as Homer basically murders him with a lamp, and he gets transformed into this creature. But don't worry, he'll be back for next year's Halloween intro to team up with Frank Grimes and one of the aliens. Season 29's Gone Boy continued this theme about Bob's mental struggles with Bart. Bart gets trapped in a bunker, and Bob is working in a prison crew assigned to help with his search. The search party mistakenly concludes that Bart is dead. Despite this, Bob still remains fixated on Bart. The memory of this kid keeps haunting him, despite being advised to cut him out of his life. Bob insists that he won't believe he's dead until he makes soup from his bones. So he escapes prison, ambushes Milhouse, and is led straight to Bart. Bob tries to kill both of them with a giant rocket, but then he feels conflicted because of his therapist's advice. In the end, he releases the boys, telling Bart that he realized he doesn't want to kill him anymore. He goes back to prison and tells his therapist he is finally happy. Then, many years later, he is inexplicably living in a lighthouse, still writing death threats in the sand and regretting his life wasted by revenge. They do explain how he broke out of prison a couple seasons later, in Bobby It's Cold Outside. As of this video's production, it's the last of the Sideshow Bob episodes. This time he crosses over with a Christmas episode, becoming Santa Claus at a nearby amusement park. Naturally, he runs into Bart, threatens to kill him, and then doesn't because he's a method actor playing Santa. There's also this mystery of someone stealing Christmas packages who has the initials SB. It's not Sideshow Bob, and this time it's not Selma Bouvier either. Wow, who would have thought they'd gone to this SB mystery well twice by now? Turns out it was actually Smithers and Burns, and Bob helps Burns get over his childhood trauma. And then at the very end, he hooks up with this lady after singing a parody of Baby It's Cold Outside. Guessing Francesca and Gino must be out of the picture at this point. You can probably tell from the tone of my commentary already, but I don't think any of the Sideshow Bob episodes after Season 8 are all that good. I know some people like the Bob Next Door and Gone Boy, but I think the entire lot is thoroughly mediocre. Thoroughly. And this is me saying this, Mr. Modern Season Diplomacy. For me, Bob is one of those cases of very excellent character, very questionable development. The writers immediately understood what was memorable about him, and it feels like they beat it into the ground over the course of 20 years. We all love hearing this guy sing, but bringing back Gilbert and Sullivan feels like the show just trying to relive the glory days. Bringing Cape Fear into my consciousness invites a comparison that the newer episodes are just never going to win. The writers fell in love with this Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote dynamic with him, where his stories increasingly center around killing Bart and the Simpson family. The goals of these stories inevitably become repetitive. To combat this, the writers had to ratchet up the complexity of his plans. But it's not that interesting of a twist to say this was actually part of Bob's convoluted scheme, when almost every other episode features a convoluted scheme. If I wanted to watch something overly complicated for no reason, I'd go watch Dark on Netflix again. So yeah, there's definitely the law of diminishing returns going on with this guy in the later seasons. But that doesn't change the fact that Bob himself is such a captivating character to watch. Like, his comedic timing is pretty much flawless. The show essentially told us why he works so well. Kelsey Grammer performs him with so much energy and wit that it's no wonder the writers would keep wanting to bring him back. As much as I grumble about the later seasons, I'm so glad that he got so much screen time. The brand new Sideshow Bob episode is always an event, and there aren't that many characters you can say that about. Sideshow Bob may not be the most successful criminal, but he knows exactly what the audience wants. Let me know in the comments what your favorite Sideshow Bob moments are, and how you think he's been handled in this series. My favorite is definitely this right here, but special shout out to him deriding their truth-handling abilities. It's such a simultaneously bizarre and referential diatribe. Also, let me know who you would like to see next for Simpsons Histories. There's currently a lot of momentum behind characters like Professor Frink, Kirk Van Houten, and Duffman. But I got a few other intriguing suggestions too, like Kent Brockman and even Shelbyville as a whole. Let me know what I should tackle next. As always, thanks for watching.